The cameras open on the tarmac at Tokyo's Haneda airport. The air hums with the roar of rotor blades as the presidential helicopter lands. Moments later, US President Donald Trump steps out, flanked by aides and Secret Service agents, waving briefly to the gathered press before striding toward the stairway of Air Force One. The scene captures a familiar image, the presidential silhouette against the sleek blue and white fuselage, but beneath the routine departure lies a moment of immense geopolitical weight. Trump's two-day stop in Japan has just concluded, and now, as he heads for South Korea, global attention turns toward his next encounter, a highly anticipated meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The two men, whose economic and strategic rivalry has defined much of the global landscape in recent years, are expected to sit down in South Korea to seek what officials privately call a path to calm. The world's two largest economies remain locked in a bruising trade conflict that has reshaped global markets, disrupted supply chains, and tested alliances from Washington to Beijing. At Haneda, the atmosphere is both ceremonial and charged. The Japanese delegation that came to see Trump off includes senior members of Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's cabinet. The Prime Minister herself had hosted Trump with warmth and symbolism, calling him a peacemaker, a word that reverberated across the Japanese media. In a carefully choreographed moment, Takaichi praised the US president's role in reducing regional tensions after what she described as a difficult decade of confrontation. Throughout his stay, Trump has been celebrated as both an ally and a power broker. Japanese officials credited him with bolstering their security partnership, reaffirming the US-Japan Defense Treaty and providing political cover for Japan's expanding regional role. The visit also coincided with a high-level regional summit in Malaysia, where Trump was lauded for his economic pragmatism and his push for trade frameworks that, as one delegate put it, put negotiation back at the center of diplomacy. Now, as the president climbs the steps of Air Force One, he pauses to wave once more, a gesture captured by dozens of cameras. The engines begin their slow, thunderous build-up. The giant aircraft, emblazoned with United States of America, lifts from the runway and banks eastward toward the Korean peninsula. Inside the aircraft, aides shuffle briefing papers and draft language for what could become one of Trump's most consequential bilateral meetings yet. The stakes are enormous. Washington and Beijing are seeking a truce that could reshape global trade policy for years. The so-called framework truce, reportedly under discussion, would suspend certain US tariffs on Chinese goods in exchange for structural reforms and expanded Chinese investment in US technology and energy projects. Officials familiar with the preparation describe the talks as delicate, even volatile. Both sides have sent signals of cautious optimism, but deep divisions remain over issues of intellectual property, currency management, and the strategic rivalry that has extended into the Pacific. For Trump, the trip to South Korea is not only about China, it is also about solidifying America's broader Indo-Pacific strategy, reassuring allies, and reinforcing his administration's claim that diplomacy through strength can deliver results. Before leaving Tokyo, Trump held a brief conversation with Japanese reporters. He spoke confidently, saying he was very hopeful about the upcoming talks and emphasizing that China wants a fair deal, and so do we. That line, delivered with his characteristic brevity, was interpreted by many observers as a sign of tactical flexibility, an acknowledgement that after years of economic brinkmanship, both Washington and Beijing have incentives to de-escalate. In Seoul, expectations are running high. South Korea, a close US ally and a neighbor to China, finds itself again in the middle of a delicate balancing act. The city of Gyeongju, where the summit is set to take place, has been transformed into a fortress of security preparations. Streets are lined with barricades, banners flutter with the US, Chinese and South Korean flags, and local hotels are filled with delegations, interpreters, and an army of journalists. Analysts across Asia see the Trump-Xi encounter as a potential inflection point, not just for trade, but for the broader geopolitical order. Over the past 2 years, Trump's foreign policy has evolved from what critics once called impulsive unilateralism to what supporters now describe as transactional realism. His approach, they argue, has forced long-standing allies and adversaries alike to rethink their strategies. The meeting with Xi Jinping could test whether that realism can yield sustainable diplomacy. For Beijing, the incentive is equally clear. stabilize relations with the United States to safeguard its slowing economy, regain investor confidence, and reduce uncertainty around technology supply chains. For Washington, success would mean easing pressure on American consumers and exporters ahead of another volatile winter in the global economy. Back in Tokyo, Japanese commentators are dissecting every frame of Trump's departure. Television anchors note the subtle nod exchanged between Trump and the Japanese Prime Minister, a gesture symbolizing continuity and shared purpose. In the days leading up to the visit, Trump and Takaichi had issued a joint statement reaffirming mutual commitment to peace and open trade across the Indo-Pacific. That message, officials say, was carefully crafted to project stability amid growing talk of protectionism and regional fragmentation. During his time in Japan, Trump had also met with business leaders from both nations. At a roundtable hosted by the US-Japan Strategic Investment Initiative, he praised Japan's pledge to expand its investment in American energy infrastructure. These are partnerships that create jobs for both our peoples, he said, before highlighting what he called a new era of shared prosperity. The comment echoed through business circles, especially as Tokyo remains a key investor in the US semiconductor and clean energy sectors. The trip also carried symbolic significance. Trump's itinerary included a visit to the Yokosuka Naval Base, where he addressed American sailors aboard the USS George Washington. In remarks that drew applause, he reaffirmed his administration's commitment to maintaining freedom of navigation and peace through strength in the region, a clear reference to ongoing maritime tensions in the South China Sea. Observers note that Japan's Prime Minister Takaichi, one of the region's most conservative leaders, has sought to align closely with Washington on defense. During Trump's visit, she announced that Japan would continue its procurement of US missile defense systems and deepen joint naval exercises with American forces. Her government's framing of Trump as a peacemaker was not merely flattery. It reflected Tokyo's recognition that Washington remains indispensable in balancing China's growing assertiveness. From Malaysia to Japan, the US president's Asia tour has been a spectacle of ceremony, negotiation, and media fascination. In Kuala Lumpur, he was photographed alongside regional leaders at the ASEAN summit, where his presence alone seemed to recalibrate diplomatic gravity. Several leaders privately praised what they described as a new tone from Washington, firm yet open to compromise, pragmatic but unyielding on core national interests. As Air Force One crosses over the East China Sea, the conversation aboard turns towards South Korea's role in the emerging trilateral dynamic among Washington, Tokyo, and Beijing. Trump's advisors have spent weeks preparing briefing materials on the complex interlinkage of trade, technology, and security. At the heart of their approach is the belief that economic competition with China can coexist with selective cooperation, an idea that will be tested when the two presidents finally meet. In Seoul, the mood is mixed, hopeful yet wary. South Korean officials are keenly aware that their country's prosperity depends on both US security guarantees and Chinese economic ties. For them, a stable US-China relationship would mean reduced uncertainty in export markets and less strategic tension on their doorstep. Still, memories of previous summits, where lofty declarations faded into renewed disputes, temper expectations. Meanwhile, in Washington, the political calculus is also shifting. Trump's Asia trip has been closely followed by lawmakers and commentators eager to see whether his assertive diplomacy yields tangible results. The administration's critics warn that a premature truce could undermine leverage, while supporters argue that progress on trade could solidify America's economic position before an election year. As news networks replay footage of Trump's departure from Tokyo, commentators frame it as a moment of theatre and purpose, an image of presidential confidence against the backdrop of geopolitical uncertainty. The symbolism is not lost on his domestic audience. The sight of Air Force One ascending from Haneda Airport serves as a reminder of the president's global reach, even as debates rage at home over spending bills and foreign policy priorities. Throughout Asia, markets respond cautiously. Stock indexes in Tokyo and Seoul edge upward on speculation that a US-China thaw could be in the works. The yen weakens slightly, reflecting renewed investor optimism in the regional trade outlook. Analysts note that every gesture, every handshake between the two leaders will be scrutinized for signs of compromise or confrontation. For Trump, the challenge ahead is balancing ambition with realism. The trade conflict has tested both economies, costing billions in tariffs and reshaping global manufacturing patterns. Yet behind the numbers lies a deeper contest of ideology and influence. Washington seeks to preserve what it calls rules-based fairness, while Beijing asserts its right to pursue what Xi Jinping has described as national rejuvenation. When Trump and Xi finally sit down in Gyeongju, the world will be watching not just for economic concessions, but for tone, whether the two leaders speak as rivals, as pragmatists, or as uneasy partners. Diplomats say the meeting will be short, likely less than 2 hours, but its implications could reverberate for years. As the hours pass and Air Force One approaches the Korean peninsula, dawn begins to break across the horizon. From the aircraft's windows, the clouds part to reveal the coastline of South Korea. The symbolism is powerful. Another frontier, another chapter in a journey that began with applause in Malaysia and ended with expectation in Seoul. By the time the plane touches down, security convoys are already waiting. Cameras flash, motorcades roar, and once again, the choreography of diplomacy resumes. Reporters shout questions that are lost in the noise of engines. Trump waves briefly before stepping into his car. Somewhere beyond the barricades, discussions are already underway, preparations for a meeting that could mark either reconciliation or renewed rivalry. The trip, framed by ceremony and strategy, underscores a central truth of modern diplomacy, that power is as much about perception as policy. From Tokyo's farewell to Seoul's anticipation, the narrative of Trump's Asia visit is one of continuity, a projection of American confidence at a time when the global order itself seems to be shifting. As night falls over Tokyo once more, Japanese broadcasters replay the footage of Trump's departure, the slow wave, the takeoff, the vapor trail against the dimming sky. In that image lies the essence of this moment, a leader in motion, a region in flux, and a world holding its breath as the next meeting between Trump and Xi promises to test not only diplomacy, but the very architecture of global peace.